Welcome back to my series on how I ran Storm King's Thunder. If you haven't already watched it, I recommend checking out part 1, where I talked about the setup and the first act that I ran. Before we jump back into what happened during our stay in Bryn, Shander, I would like to start off by talking a little bit about some of the research and preparation I did to flesh out Icewind Dale. I'd already read about Icewind Dale through the Drizzt book series, so I had a rough idea of some of its history and locations. I wanted to get some more recent information on the area, however, so I went online to do some research. I tried to get my hands on the adventure Legacy of the Crystal Shard. It is set in Icewind Dale, and from what I've gathered, has a fairly good description of the region. It also has some really great maps of the area. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a place that had the adventure in stock anymore, so I had to give up on it. It is available via the DM's Guild as a PDF if you're interested in checking it out, and from what I've heard, it's well worth the money. Although I haven't read it myself. The maps used in the adventure can be purchased directly from the artist Mike Schley. I'll add a link to them below. They are very useful to have if your party spends a prolonged period of time in Icewind Dale. I spent quite some time reading up on Icewind Dale on the Legacy of the Crystal Shard wiki and the Forgotten Realms wiki. I made sure to look up the populations of each of the 10 towns and the names of all the different speakers that rule the different towns. Since I mostly had information from my vague recollections from the Icewind Dale novels, the old Icewind Dale computer game, and the wikis on the towns other than Bryn Shander, I had to expand on the information I had quite a bit, making up proprietors and wares of stores, noticeable NPCs and such. I wrote at least a page of notes on each town before my players even set their foot in Icewind Dale, and several of the towns were never even visited. It was also around this time that I first dug up the Wyrms of the North articles from the Dragon magazine, which describes in detail some of the most famous dragons living in the North, many of which make an appearance in Storm King's Thunder. In particular, I dug up the article on Arvicherace, as I knew she might make an appearance during this part of the campaign. But as I was seeking information on her, I also found a treasure trove of information on both Clauf and Imrith that helped immensely later in the campaign. I cannot stress enough how important and useful the information I found in those articles was for me during the later parts of the campaign. I would like to take a few moments to talk about the music I used in Icewind Dale as well. I wanted the Dale to stand out and be memorable when compared to the rest of Faerun. So, it was one of the few locations that had its own battle music. I also had a playlist for the Dale itself and a separate playlist for Bryn Shander that was a little livelier. The basis for my soundtrack was the music from the Banner Saga. It is a wonderful soundtrack, and I highly suggest you check it out. At the start of the campaign, as the ability to speak Giant was rather rare in the group, I would sometimes use Icelandic to simulate Giant speech, so the singing and the music really fit in very well. There were a few songs thrown in here and there from other sources, but I really found the Banner Saga captured the feeling of Icewind Dale the best. Now, without further delay, let's talk about Bryn Shander and Icewind Dale and what happened. The first thing you need to consider when starting things off is what season is the story set in. Traveling to and from Icewind Dale in winter is practically impossible, and the Dale is quite different in summertime. And for my part, I wanted my players to experience the more famous and iconic harsh cold of the Dale. So I decided to set my campaign in the early spring, just shortly after the pass into Icewind Dale had been opened after the winter. I considered setting it during the fall, but there were several locations throughout the north I expected my players to visit later on, and I didn't want them to experience them in the middle of winter. And if I'd set the adventure in fall, there would have been a real possibility of the players getting stuck in Icewind Dale over an entire winter if they didn't leave in time. My players asked to be dropped off some distance from Bryn Shander, as not to alarm the town by the sudden appearance of a flying tower. This gave my players their first experience of Icewind Dale, as they marched along the road to Bryn Shander with the famous Dale wind sweeping over them. My players were lacking in winter gear. After all, for them, spring had just started, and so it made the march even more harsh. Since it took them a few hours to walk to Bryn Shander, I rolled up a random encounter as the group traveled. As it turns out, I rolled up a group of 10 towners on their way home. So as the group traveled, they bumped into this small trio of hunters, heading for Bryn Shander to sell their wares, who could tell them a little more about the land. As the group entered Bryn Shander, I tried my best to make sure they briefly saw all the important NPCs that would later take part in the battle during the siege of Bryn Shander. Ograk Brighthelm is fairly hard to miss as she welcomed the group to the city. Xerac of Susail could be seen outside the temple as the group made their way up the main thoroughfare of the city, tending to the temple as the priest of the House of the Triad stood on the steps calling the people to service. Sir Beric was leaving the House of the Triad at the time, I believe. When the group reached the square at the center of town, they ran into Beldora, and of course soon thereafter the group met Sheriff Markham as they delivered their message. The only one I didn't find a good way of introducing to the players as they made their way up through the town was Devessa Shane, although I could have let them spot her across the market, dealing with some town business. I let the players deliver their message and wind down for a bit before the action started. The group went by the Emporium and gathered at the inn to get out of the cold and get some warm food. I had a group of guards eating at the same inn, and as the giants approached, a flustered guard rushed in and exchanged quick words with his fellow guards before they all gripped their spears and ran out. A sense of worry started to seep into the people of the inn, and I needed little else incentive for the players to exit and see what was going on. I had Droofy blow her horn, giving the players another indication that something was going on down by the gates. As they started to make their way down there, they could see guards rushing towards the walls, and civilians fleeing toward the city center. That is when I let Droofy let out the call for Arthur Cimber. Had the players not reacted to what was happening in town, I would have let the giants start to bombard the city with rocks. Would they still not have acted, I would have let a few giants breach the walls and come eye to eye with the group. As it were, nothing so drastic was needed. The siege of Bryn Shander went as planned, the players fighting the giants at the gate, seeing the full might of giants up close and personal for the first time. I didn't let them control any of the NPCs. There were a few reasons for this. First off, I didn't want my players to miss out on any of the quests that the surviving NPCs could offer, and I suspected my players might put the defenders in rather risky positions to help themselves. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, as I could always find a way to give out the quests another way should a key NPC fall, I felt that it would take my players out of the moment and the immersion if they suddenly found themselves controlling a stranger. I happen to have an old Warhammer Fortress model lying around, which, it turns out, is just the right height for the walls of Bryn Shander, so I broke that out to give the battlefield a little bit of extra dimensionality. The group was victorious, and although there were a few close calls, no one at the gate died. There were several guards who died elsewhere, and the giants had bombarded the city with rocks, causing damage and deaths. The players offered some healing help and started to be offered quests. I decided to space out the quests, making sure they were offered Sheriff Markham's quest first, so they had a reason to stay in Icewind Dale. Devessa offered her quest, or rather reward, straight away as well. Sir Beric was quick to offer him a quest, and to speak of his hunt for Weevil as well, and Xerac asked him to come talk to him before they left Icewind Dale. Ogret did not offer her quest until the players were on their way to leave Bryn Shander, so it wouldn't distract the group too much, but she did offer them the hint that should they slay any giants, they might want to bring back proof of their deed, say, perhaps a head, and that the sheriff would surely reward them for such an act. The group decided to start by trying to track the giants that had attacked Bryn Shander. After they would visit each town in order and keep an eye out for Weevil, who they suspected might be hiding somewhere in the area, in the hopes of being able to cash in on his rather large bounty. On their way to the coast, they traveled through Bremen, where the party went drinking at the Five Tavern Square and found themselves immersed in the brawls that frequently broke out there. The party set out once more toward the sea, and on their way they were spotted by Arvicherace, who picked up the group's barbarian and sent him flying after the rest of the party turned invisible or shapeshifted into small animals. Being a barbarian, he was fine. I do wish that I could have done more with Arvicherace. She is an interesting dragon, but the players did not run into her a second time. As they continued their journey towards the shore, the party found that the giant's longship had departed Icewind Dale, and so they traveled back down south, passing through Bremen once more, then onwards through Targus towards Termalaine. It was on their way there along the Mayor Deldoon Lake that they finally encountered some giants, killing one of them while the others fled. They took the head back to Bryn Shander and were given the titles of Defenders of Icewind Dale, a monarch of a group wore proudly for the rest of the campaign, and introduced themselves with at every chance. There was still much more to see, but the group had quests all across the north now to deal with and a ordning to restore. So they set out from Bryn Shander with Sirikov to sail and traveled through Hundleston and Ironmaster to mark off those first 2 quests from their list. While in Hundleston, the players learned of the Archmage Crowan Valharrow, a harper in Everlund, who could perhaps aid them in their quest. He would turn out to be a key NPC in the future of the campaign. If there was something I would change running this part again, it would be to add a few more random encounters. Icewind Dale has its own encounter list, but it's fairly short, and if your players spend a great deal of time on the Dale, they just may run out of things to meet. I think I ran each encounter at least once in the time they spent there. Most of the fights my players got themselves into were exceedingly easy for their level, so I would more than likely have thrown in a few tougher fights, and also some non-combat encounters and locations that showed off some of the beauty, history, and culture of Icewind Dale. I would also add in a quest or event in each of the 10 towns. I had some things prepared for a few of them, such as the Brawl in Bremen, but I didn't really have anything special prepared for targets, and visiting each town should have been more of an experience. There were many places that my group never got to visit in Icewind Dale, and many NPCs that I had prepared that they never got to meet. As luck would have it, they would return one day to the Dale to defend it once more, and that would give me a chance to introduce them to the rest of the speakers, but that story happens much later, after the events of Storm King's Thunder, and we'll be talking about that someday, but not now. Instead, let us leave off here, and next time we can discuss how the group traveled all across the north in search for answers, what foreshadowing I did for the major plot details to come, and how I used random encounters to tie everything together. As always, if you enjoyed my video, then please press the like button. It really helps out a lot, and if you don't want to miss my next video on Storm King's Thunder, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to support this channel, you can share this video with your friends or on social media. I really appreciate the help in getting the word out. You can also check out my DM Guild products, or follow me on Twitter or Tumblr. Links to all of that in the description. Until next time, Dungeon Delvers.